Hello and welcome to another edition of Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham, where Team Needham discusses everything healthcare. I am your host, Shawn Needham, along with my producer, Lindsay, and we are streaming live from the Moses Lake Professional Pharmacy Studio today. Today, you do not want to miss this episode till the very, very end because we have two experts on today. My brother, Shane Needham, who has his PhD in analytical chemistry, and we're going to be talking about sugar chemistry. Is carbohydrates and sugar, are they the same thing? Labels might not tell you they're the same thing, but they might be the same thing. So check it out. Check out the whole podcast to find out more. And we have Tosha Stafford back again because she is an expert in weight loss, and we're just going to be talking about labels in general, protein versus carbohydrates, and all this gets confusing. All these macros get confusing when you read labels. We're going to specifically be focusing on carbohydrates and artificial sweeteners and natural sweeteners. We're going to be talking about that a lot. What do they do to your blood glucose? What do they do to your insulin levels? Are they going to change them? Some you might be surprised. So stay tuned until the very last of the episode because we're going to be talking about this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to let Shane just describe what a carbohydrate is. Shane, welcome to our show, and tell us what a carbohydrate is.
Oh man, I wasn't expecting that question, but hey, thank you very much. It's great to be on your show. It is.
I can explain it for you if you don't know.
Yeah, so a carbohydrate. So it's one of the macros that we actually have in that we actually have to use as calories for energy, and we have actually carbohydrates. We have proteins or fats. Those are the only things that our body needs and it can use as calories. So if we eat paper, which is fiber, by the way, if we eat paper or cellulose, if we eat that, we're actually not burning up calories, even though chemically it actually, in a bomb calorimeter, for example, it would actually have calories. It does not have calories how we are actually metabolizing it. So there's three things: protein, fats, and carbohydrates. We're going to be talking about carbohydrates today and artificial and natural sweeteners, whatever that means, by the way. So a carbohydrate is just a way for your body to get energy. Most of that is processed through the glucose metabolism. Our body uses glucose to actually use energy. There's many ways we can get glucose. We can eat it. Our body will make it. We actually do not need glucose to survive. Our body will make it. We do not need carbohydrates to survive. Our body will make it from fats.
Let me just clear that up. We don't have to get them exogenously.
Correct.
Okay, so we do need them because our body's preferred method of energy, and we could debate this versus keto and all that, but our body's preferred method of energy through the Krebs cycle is still glucose, correct? I knew you were going to say that. Okay. I know. Biochemically speaking, and if you talk to a biologist, that's what they would say with the Krebs cycle. But when you start talking diet with ketones and things like that, people would debate that. So let's just go on.
Yeah, we better move on from that one. So our body will make glucose through gluconeogenesis and so on and so forth. But anyway, so carbohydrates are just your body uses glucose, and your body will sometimes take glucose molecules and put them together, and that's called polymerization. And it makes more than one molecule, then makes what we call glycogen. And that can be stored in your liver. That can also be stored in your muscles. And that is sometimes there's 1,700 to 2,000 of those glucose molecules put together, and that's called glycogen. And then your body will chop up those glycogens and use glucose as fuel until it's depleted from your liver and your muscles. And so that's kind of a carbohydrate in general. Our body uses them for energy, but we don't have to ingest them. We can actually our body will make them for fuel. Our body cannot make protein, and our bodies cannot make fats, but it can use fat and protein to make actually glucose. So that's kind of carbohydrate in general.
So let's get into the more simple definition of a carbohydrate, i.e., let's get into the breakdown of the root word of carbohydrate. Tell us what carbohydrate means, Shane, and what that means when we consume carbohydrates.
Yeah, so carbohydrate means carb, means carbon, And carbon is actually a molecule, has a atomic mass unit or a molecular weight of 12 in the periodic chart. If you look at them, it is actually the most common. Well, it depends. Most common biological actual element out there. So
it's really what makes something living versus non-living per
yeah.
definition of science.
Yep. And fats and glucose and proteins all have all have carbon in them. Hydrate means water. Hydrate or hydration, right? It means water. So carbon hydrates with water. And if you look at the actual structure, we're just going to be looking at some structures. We're not going to talk about a lot of chemistry today, but we'll be looking at some structures. If you look at the structure of glucose, for example, or sugar molecules or carbohydrates, you'll notice that they have carbon and then water attached to them in one way or another through hydrolysis reactions. Again, we won't talk too much about that, but that's a carbohydrate. So you have carbon and water, and that makes carbohydrate.
Okay, so for every 1 gram of carbohydrate we consume, how much water does it pull into our body?
That is debatable, and I think that might even be biologically different between person to person. They say at least 4 times in general. So it's in that range. So for example, if you ate, for example, 150 grams of carbohydrates, which is easy to do, actually, for most people, I don't do that on a normal basis, but you'll absorb, let's see, that'd be 450, 500 grams of actual water. And guess what that water weight is? So when somebody eats a lot of chips or something, or a lot of sugars, and all of a sudden they weigh it's like, I didn't eat much and I weigh 4 more pounds than I did yesterday. Well, it's because your body's hanging on to the water.
That's right. Okay, I wanted to clear that part up. So now let's go into a little bit more of talking about the glucose versus the dextrose, and let's just get into a little bit more sugar chemistry. Let's go into monosaccharide versus disaccharide. Shane, I know you weren't prepared for these questions, but I figured since you're the chemist, you're not going to be scared that I'm going to throw them on you. So let's talk about monosaccharide versus disaccharide, because this is going to be important. So stay with us, folks, because this is going to be important when you're reading these labels, because sometimes these labels will have a monosaccharide or disaccharide on them. It's important to know the difference, because sometimes manufacturers will use tricky terms because they know sugar or sucrose is a bad word. So they'll try to name it something else when in reality it's the same thing. So Shane, let's go into monosaccharide and disaccharide.
Yeah. Okay, so monosaccharide and disaccharide. Monosaccharide means mono, that means one. So that means one sugar molecule. And remember, a sugar molecule, saccharide means sugar. Okay, that's another way to say sugar. And sugar could be, well, maybe get into this, but it could be glucose, it could be fructose, it could mean galactose. Those are kind of the 3 main sugars. Those are all monosaccharides. You start putting more than one of those together, now you start making disaccharides. For example, sucrose is a glucose molecule and a fructose molecule together, and that makes a disaccharide. And I think galactose and glucose is lactose.
That's correct.
So milk, that's kind of lactose, as we most know. That's kind of like milk sugar. And
fructose, by the way, is fruit sugar.
Fruit sugar. Yeah. So those are the 3 main monosaccharides are galactose, glucose, and fructose.
Okay. So let's get into some. Let's talk a little bit about sugar alcohols, and then we'll get into more just to introduce them. And then we'll get more into the details. If you guys read on the back of packages, Tosha, go ahead and, if you don't mind, put your comment in here, because we were talking about something about sugar alcohols and how you'll read it on the back of a package, and because they don't want to say sugar, or so when you see sugar alcohol, what are you talking about subtracting calories, and how confusing it is? Go ahead and comment on that.
So on nutrition labels, we count macros, right? Which is what you guys talked about. Your protein, your fats, and your carbs equal total calories, okay? So protein, 4 calories per gram. Carbohydrates is 4 calories per gram. Fats are double, 9 calories per gram. So if you were to look at the back of a nutrition label and do the math, you'll kind of notice that the calories don't always add up, right? And that's because of the net carbs and the sugar alcohol that manufacturers have cashed in it on and kind of created their own category. So it gets super confusing to the consumer because it's like, okay, am I counting? Like, I get this question all the time with my bariatric clients. Should I be counting total carbs or net carbs? You know, what's going to give me the difference in my weight the fastest and the most sustainable? And that's a good question because, you know, does net carbs really impact weight loss? And what you have to do is you have to subtract. So net carbs, you're subtracting in whole foods the fiber. In processed foods, you're subtracting the sugar alcohols. But the rule of thumb is that you subtract half of the sugar alcohols because that's what's assumed that your body will absorb. Well, how confusing is that? How is the average consumer supposed to know that?
It is very confusing. And let's just define sugar alcohols a little bit. So probably one of the most popular ones is sorbitol. And if you think about sorbitol, in hard candy. Sorbitol is usually a lot in hard candy, maybe in gummy bears. But another sugar alcohol is xylitol. Erythritol is one of the most popular ones now. And you'll look at a lot of keto recipes and you'll see erythritol and you'll see, and you kind of wonder, it's like, well, what are these sugar alcohols? They're calling them sugar. So what are they? And just like Tosha says, they still are going to affect your calories, just not as much. Usually it's about half the calories of what a regular carb would be. And it's not that they don't have the same, it's all actually there. It's just the way our body processes it. They can't be absorbed as well. So when they're not absorbed, you only absorb about half of it. And they are sweet, like carbohydrates. So they can be used to help sweeten things. But there again, just because, you know, it doesn't mean that they don't affect your blood sugar. They will. They can. And a lot of times, too, one of the problems with them, too, is because they're not absorbed. If you get too much of them, they will cause diarrhea. So, Shane, I know you've done lots of tests because you have a close family member that has type 1 diabetes. Have you done any tests on sugar alcohols and how they affect blood glucose?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's actually some really good research on this through Dr. Berenstein's Diabetes Solutions book. And so my son is a type 1 diabetic. He's an adult now. But when he was diagnosed over 10 years ago, I wanted to see if he could have artificial sweeteners. And me being a scientist, I turned into a science project. He actually won a poster award at his local science fair for actually doing the test. But we tested all the non-caloric artificial sweeteners and see what they did to his blood glucose. And every single one of them, stevia, Splenda, and we'll get into this a little bit later. They actually raise his blood glucose. Monk fruit, all of them raise his blood glucose. Besides Stevia Drops, Stevia liquid did not raise his blood glucose. And so certainly they affect your blood glucose. If you look at some of these like erythritol, they're very similar to sugar chemistry. The sugar molecule looks very the same. They're actually usually chlorinated, which I think has some whole other potential toxicity issues and whatnot. And so anyway, they're very similar. So does your body treat them as a sugar? Maybe they can, maybe they can't. And it actually might be also individual too. What they do to one person, they may not do it to another person. And so, but for him as a type 1 diabetic, they affected his blood glucose levels.
I think that's good to know. So thank you for sharing that story. So let's move on with some specific chemical identities, and we can talk a little bit about packaging in general. Tosha, do you have anything else to add to our conversation quite yet?
Well, there's a new one out there called, we've discussed this, impact carbs. So impact carbs are the same as net carbs. So it's a new marketing one, right? So when it comes to labels, it's now as a consumer, we have to look for all this stuff. And then, so Shane, I get a lot of questions on more type 2 diabetes around this. So maybe as you guys talk about how it impacts the body, you can chime in on type 2 diabetics as well.
Well, let me comment on that first of all. Diabetes mellitus. Let's let's say that because there is a different type of diabetes insipidus, which is different than sugar diabetes. Diabetes mellitus literally means honey siphon. It means you're literally urinating out honey. That's what diabetes mellitus means. And type 1 or type 2, it's the same thing. You're urinating out glucose, which means you have an excess of glucose in your body. Now, there are some different manifestations of what causes type 1 versus type 2, although there's some overlap now also. I wouldn't say now, but there always has probably been somewhat. Type 1 diabetes usually means your pancreas is not making enough insulin. And that means, used to be years ago, they would call it juvenile onset diabetes. And they would also call it insulin-dependent diabetes. Well, now because we have so many type 2 diabetics, and type 2 diabetes is coming down into juveniles because we have so much insulin resistance, we don't call it that anymore. We don't call it juvenile versus adult onset diabetes. So type 1 diabetes, type 2 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is usually your pancreas doesn't make enough insulin. Type 2 diabetes means your pancreas makes enough insulin, your body's just not sensitive to it. Usually you have really high insulin levels with type 2 diabetes. Bottom line is, this is the bottom line, and a lot of people don't like admitting this. Diabetes mellitus, whether it's type 1 or whether it's type 2, is a carbohydrate metabolism problem. That means that whether you're type 1 or whether you're type 2, you need to be very careful with carbs. Shane, I know you're very passionate about this subject, and because you have a son that has type 1 diabetes, will you please elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, you know what? Especially having a son with type 1 diabetes, it's actually a little bit frustrating that they're even called the same thing. But they are, because it means you're excreting sugar, honey. That's that's what the name diabetes mellitus is. But so your urine would turn sweet. That's how they used to diagnose it way back in the Roman days. Okay. I wish they weren't even called the same thing, because one is environmental, and it is usually reversible, and that's type 2. That's usually as you get older, and you have bad diet, and you don't take care of yourself, and you overeat, and you're usually obese, you get type 2 diabetes. Type 1, usually it's juvenile onset, and they don't really know why. Some of it could be environmental. Some of it could be viruses. Some of it could be, we don't know. Some of it there are links to genetics now. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so we don't know. Here's what we do know. It's more common now than it used to be, and we don't really know why that is. Is it because of our poor processed food diet? We don't know.
Is it because their mother was a gestational diabetic because she didn't eat very well during pregnancy?
Absolutely. There are correlations there. There
Yep.
are correlations there. And certainly their mother did have gestational diabetes. And so that's a possibility. And so why I want to separate those is because a type 1 diabetic, it's not reversible. You're going to have to use insulin the rest of your life. Whereas it's my understanding, Shawn helps treat type 2 diabetics. And how many of you have you reversed? And Tosha, you've probably been the same way. How many times have you seen somebody through diet and exercise reverse their type 2 diabetes, Shawn?
Go ahead, Tosha. I'll let you speak first.
Well, in bariatrics, it's super high because obviously at the weight that we're starting at, we have bariatric surgery to lose the weight. And part of our diet is to be, for life, lower carb, So the success rate for reversing type 2 diabetes is super high in the bariatric community. And for me, almost all of my clients have reversed it, but I have some new ones coming on that are still type 2 diabetic. But like you guys said, it's carb sensitive. And so when people regain weight, it's typically because they're eating excessive carbs.
Yep. And Tosha, that's why I love having you on, because you have first world experience with this. And, I think a bariatric patient is a perfect extreme example of how if you lose weight, your diabetes goes away. We just had a gal on our podcast last week, and she talked about how, she had a type 2 diabetic come in, on 5 different medications, and they got them off all but one medication. And the goal is to get them off that one. Here's my personal opinion. I say this as a pharmacist, and I like saying this publicly because I believe in it. I'm passionate about it. I personally do not believe in long-term treatment of type 2 diabetes with medication. It is a diet and lifestyle disease. And I would tell you, and of course, I'm gonna say that, don't go off your medications if you're a diabetic. Don't go off them. But you do have hope that you don't need to be on those medications long term. There are long term and short term side effects from those things. So it is possible to get off all your diabetes medications. And I can tell you this: if I had that horrible diagnosis of diabetes, and my exercise wasn't working or my weight loss wasn't working, here's what I would do: I just would not eat carbs, period. And your diabetes would go away. If you don't have carbs, your diabetes would go away. Shane can explain in Dr. Berenstein's book how he talks about that there are even certain type 1 diabetics that just don't eat carbs, and they need very little insulin. So, there are definitely stories of that. So there again, type 2 diabetes is reversible, whereas type 1 isn't. That's what's important to differentiate here. So let's move on. Shane, you want to talk about some sugar chemistry with specific molecules and structures?
Yeah, sure. So let me get into the consumer, or the normal consumer, of how we're going to look at things and how we're going to see labels and look at sweeteners and stuff like that. So I've got a couple in front of me here. These are both based on stevia. Okay. So this is called Truvia. So it's based upon the stevia leaf. It's an extract, and this is a solid. So I can shake it. You can hear it moving. You can add it just like you can a sugar to baking or something like that. And so you can use this for keto baking or paleo baking, those kind of things. Okay. And so it's really good. Now let's look at the ingredients. The main ingredient is erythritol and stevia leaf extract. Okay. And then I have stevia drops. The only ingredient in this is stevia leaf extract. Now, why is that important? Because anytime you look at a powder type extract or a powder type sweetener, there are going to be additives to it to make it anti-caking, to make it more sweet, to make it have a longer shelf life. For example, with this right here, if you actually don't refrigerate it for a long, long time, it'll start growing bugs. It will actually get bacteria in it.
No preservative.
Okay? No preservative. Okay. And so that's the important part. In other words, a lot of the times this has dextrose added to it, which remember is just glucose, or maltodextrin, which is just mini glucose put together.
Stevia in the raw has dextrose. And let's just talk about why. Another reason they put those fillers in there.
Yeah,
yes.
It's like but it's in a packet. Yep.
Correct. Here's one of the reasons they put those fillers in there too, Shane, is it's really strictly out of convenience. Because if you think about how potent like stevia or saccharin is really potent. So if you think about how potent they are, you would just have a few granules of saccharin because it's 300 times more potent than sucrose. So you just have a few little granules, which wouldn't be very convenient in a packet. So they've got to add some fillers to it. Yes, partly for anti-caking, but also just to fill up, to make it more, to fill it up, so it makes it more convenient to put into a solution.
Yeah.
Okay, Go ahead, Shane.
Okay, so if we bring up a glucose molecule compared to a maltodextrin molecule, make sure you look at your labels. You people that are eating protein bars and protein powders, I eat those too. I eat protein powders. Be wary of these labels and how you read them. Okay, so on the left, you'll see a glucose molecule. That's what our body processes for energy. Okay, on the right, you'll see maltodextrin, and so a lot of times you'll see in protein powders and certain food additives, so on and so forth, in labels, you'll see maltodextrin. All that means is glucose. So that is a sugar. That is a sugar. Carbohydrates are sugar. Glucose is sugar. Maltodextrin is sugar. And so don't just read the label and look at sugars. Look at these other hidden additives that are also going to raise your blood glucose levels. It's also going to make you more insulin sensitive. And it's probably not the most healthy choice in the world. Okay. And so maltodextrin is just, I believe it's between 2 to 17 glucose molecules put together. And that's just called it's a polymer, or it's a polysaccharide, multiple or many sugars. And so be careful of you seeing these. They'll also see in some food additives, you'll see a molecule that's added, or an ingredient that's added that's called dextrose. That is another name for glucose. Just go look at it historically. It's another name for glucose. So that's just something to be careful of when you look at these two molecules and what's going to be added to certain nutritional ingredients.
It's just like labels in general. You just have to be very careful. And just like Tosha was talking about, what was it, Tosha? Impact carbohydrates? Is that what it was?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that's a new one on some protein bars is impact carbs.
Yeah. And I've never seen that or heard of that. And it's just when things go out of favor because they're high fructose corn syrup's another one. So people know that that's kind of in the press that high fructose corn syrup might be bad for you. So you got to watch some labels because they're coming up with some funky names to kind of hide that. I can't remember what I was reading the other day, but it was something to hide that. So just realize sugar is sugar, whether it's maltose or dextrose or lactose or glucose or maltodextrin. There's a lot of different ways to name it. So perfect. Shane, you want to go into? Go ahead, Tosha.
It's a manufacturer's job to capture the market share. So they gotta get market share from their competitors. So they're going to be very, very creative in what they do on their labels to capture that market share. And with the FDA, there's regulation around, okay, here's total carbs, here's net carb or fiber, here's sugar alcohols, but there's a big gray area on all this other stuff going on around, impact carbs. So from a manufacturing standpoint, they can get by with this and get really creative with packaging, and it's going to lure the consumer in thinking, oh, that looks really good. I can have all this chocolatey creaminess goodies because it only has 2 net carbs. But like you guys are speaking about, there's a difference in the way the body responds. And so it's very, very tricky. And, especially like look at my clientele, bariatrics, right? A lot of them are just learning labels and how to read them. So it gets very confusing. And then they're wondering why they can't keep, maybe their levels in check because it's not their fault. It's the labeling.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so Tosha, let's just go ahead while we're talking about that. So sometimes that, the macros, that's where the macros get confusing. And so what do you tell them? Do you tell them, well, look at the overall calories of what you're consuming too? Because isn't bottom line if food, we talk about macros, whether it be fat, carbohydrate, or protein, is just a fuel for our bodies. Shouldn't total calories really be maybe one of the most important factors? So what do you tell those patients, Tosha?
So I do in my education with my private coaching clients or in my Back on Track program that I just started, which is selling out every month, which is great. I
Good
teach
a whole
course on nutrition labels, right? And part of that whole course, well, it's a whole lesson on nutrition labels, and I go pretty deep in a online presentation around alcohol labels. But here's my rule of thumb: is count total carbs, total calories, calculate the calories yourself, because I think and you guys will appreciate this, from a data standpoint, right? The more accurate your data is, the better your outcome can be, because you'll have true data. If you're flip-flopping, and in my world, what I see a lot of flip-flopping going on between like keto and then I want carbs, so I want to eat balanced again. So they flip-flop back and forth. And so for me, I'm looking for a sustainable way for my clients to maintain, so they can lose all their weight and they can reach goal weight and they can, live a nice, healthy life. So my rule of thumb, and this is what I preach all the time in my groups and on my page, is count total. Just count total. It eliminates all this gray confusion of what you should be doing. Just calculate it up yourself and count total. Because here's the thing too, is if you're trying to track your macros and stay within your calories, and say you use MyFitnessPal and you're scanning in the labels, Well, some labels are do total carbs, but some of them are net carbs. So they could throw your macros out of whack because of the way they're scanning in. And so then it even gets even more confusing to somebody who's not as tuned into things as we are, right?
Right. You have to be careful with the way those carbs are tracked in MyFitnessPal. I find errors all the time. I use MyFitnessPal. I don't think there's anything against it. I don't have anything against it. I think one thing is that you have to be consistent. And I think, like you say, be consistent with something and stay with that. But also let's just talk about this while we're talking about labels is that, Shane talked about he eats protein powder and he'll eat protein bars, and I do also. Sometimes it's just all you can get in certain situations, and you need something. But let's face it. I know, I go to the store and I try to find a healthy protein bar, and I don't know. I don't really want to pick on one, so I'm not even going to say a name. But you look at it, it's like, 30 grams of protein, and you look at that bar, and it really is no different than a Snickers bar. It's no different than a Payday bar. Payday bars, because they have lots of peanuts, they actually have quite a bit of protein. So here's still what I stress: stay away from packaged food. If it doesn't rot, don't eat it. Does that make it more difficult to track your macros? Absolutely, it does. Does it make it better?
No,
well,
no, it's the opposite.
It's not. Well,
if you
track your macros,
if you eat 4 ounces of ground beef, you know exactly how much fat and how much and how much protein you're getting.
Okay, well, let's just say you don't completely, because what kind of is it? 70%? Is it 90% lean? What kind of lean?
Package.
I know you can. Here's one of the things, though. I love it, and I weigh my food. Some people will not weigh their food, but I'm all into weighing your food, and then it is more accurate. But it's not as easy as scanning a package. There again, if it doesn't rot, don't eat it. Stay away from packaged food. So that alone will help stop some of the confusion when it comes to eating based on labels. Tosha, do you have anything to say about that?
Well, ground turkey is not as good as sometimes a protein bar, right? So,
right.
But you are correct. Because okay, so there's, like you said, there are some protein bars out there that have some pretty good stats, right? But they taste like a candy bar. So like in my field, they taste like a candy bar. So then what are you doing? Oh, I want one. Oh, I want another one of those. Mm-hmm. And then what you find is, because there's a lot of transfer addiction that happens after bariatrics to candy or to alcohol. There's huge transfer addiction. And I think that that's a contributing factor to it, because there are all these protein bars deemed healthy because they have protein, but yet they taste like a candy. So then what does it trigger? And then how does it affect your blood sugars? But mentally, how does it trigger you? And so I think you guys are right. I think the cleaner you can eat, the more successful you're going to be, but also realizing that in our society, right, we need a little bit of convenience too, but it's still, I always operate by like the 90-10 rule, 90% whole food and go as minimal processed as you can, the better off you're going to be in the long term. When you are successful with your weight loss, you reach goal, and keeping it off, because the regain after bariatrics is super high. So, yeah.
Thank you for that, Tosha. I always appreciate you throwing your good information in there. Shane, let's go on. Go ahead, Shane. What are you going to say?
Well, that's a good point that she talks about, is that that's one thing that Dr. Rob Wolf talks about, and also Dr. Bernstein talks about. When people actually use artificial sweetener, it makes them crave more sweets. And so, and I think it's the same way with me. And it's another reason to maybe get rid of them. And if we think about Jack LaLanne, he lived to be almost 100 years old, and he was the guy that basically jumping jacks were actually invented or named for. And he
was doing his radio show like a week before he died.
Yeah, he was. I had no idea he was sick. And then the next thing, he got like some kind of a lung infection and died. And his daughter wanted him to go to the hospital, and he said, no, they would kill me. And so he just But he said, here's one of the things he said to his longevity: if it tastes good, spit it out. There's probably truth in that.
I'm going to argue that because you know what? I love ribeye. Should I spit it out?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Now I can tell you, I can't eat. Usually, depending on the situation, I just can't personally eat more than 12 ounces at one sitting. It's just, I sometimes don't even weigh it, and then I do before the fact, and I'm like, or after the fact, after I ate part of it, and it's always like almost 12 ounces. I mean, just that's, so it's hard to overeat. Just like Tosha says, it's easy to overeat a candy bar or a protein bar that tastes like candy, but it's hard to overeat real food.
It is.
Yeah. After bariatrics, we're down to like 3 or 4 ounces. I'm 8 years post-op, and I'm 3 or 4 ounces of a dense protein. So if it's like chicken breast, steak, the denser it is, the less I can get in. Fish, I can get in a little bit more because it's a softer protein. But sometimes I want that, like maybe 6 or 7 ounces of ribeye, and I get 3 because that's max capacity.
Well, think about it. A pound of chicken is 400 calories. Do you know how hard it would? I've tried it. I can't eat a pound of chicken.
You know what, dude? 6 ounce chicken, a 4 ounce chicken breast. I'm done.
And that's 100 calories.
I know.
Amazing. Very dense. But yeah,
it is. It is. Proteins are very satiating.
Yeah.
So let's get into, I think we're going to look at some pictures too. What was the first one you wanted us to put up there, Shane? We're going to talk about some of the pictures you sent us today of some of the labels of artificial or natural sweeteners.
Yeah, I think we're going to put up Sweet and Low. So just a package of yellow, or a package of the pink, I think, sweetener.
Yeah. And if you guys, I'm going to talk a little bit of history before Shane gets to discuss it, but there's a packet. I'm holding one up, and there's a picture. Sweet and Low is the pink. You know it as the pink. It was probably one of the first artificial sweeteners. It goes back into the 1800s, actually. And it was kind of discovered serendipitously, like a lot of scientific stuff is. But what artificial sweeteners do is they try to work at our sweet receptors, which are usually proteins. They try to work on that same protein like a sucrose would. So that's what they're trying to mimic. And Sweet and Low was one of the first ones. Really, if you look at the history of artificial sweeteners, is that I think it's interesting that artificial sweeteners never really gotten really popular. And, Tosha and maybe Shane can help me with this. They never really got really popular until the 1970s, which is interesting because that's when Americans started getting fat. So I find it interesting as artificial sweeteners got popular that, the obesity rate in America came up. So I don't know if Tosha, if you have any comments about that, and if you've seen, if that's what your experience is.
I don't know about what date they got popular, but I know just in the 8 years since I've had bariatrics, it's huge. I mean, I'm seeing artificial sweeteners and everything. And then after bariatrics, it's like, how do we get our water in? Artificial sweeteners in our water to flavor it, to make it taste good. So, I mean, they're in, at least my community, they're a large part of our diet. Perfect.
And go ahead and tell us about this package, this labeling.
So if you look at it, you look at the ingredients, and you kind of have to zoom in. So look closely, if you're watching online. And I love the marketing that the food companies do here. Thank you, Shawn. It says, look at the first ingredient.
That would be Lindsay.
Great, Lindsay. Thank you. The first ingredient is nutritive dextrose. What the heck does that mean?
Nutritive. I mean, talk about a marketing gimmick. Nutritive dextrose.
Somebody's an educated person, and I say that in all, just because if you don't know any better, you're going to read that and think, that sounds good for me.
Right.
Well, what that means is nutritive glucose, nutritive sugar. It probably means, I don't know, it probably means it has calories, even though says it's marketed as a 0-calorie sweetener. That's because you're taking very little of it. And then we look at the next ingredient is soluble saccharin. And then we look at cream of tartar and calcium silicate. That's to make it so it doesn't stick together, and so on and so forth. And so, in other words, anytime you're going to look at any of these powdered type sweeteners, there's going to be some type of an agent, maltodextrin or dextrose in it that is actually has calories. You're taking very little of it, so they can actually label it as 0 calories. But
well, let's go back on that too, Shane. Is that actually per the FDA's guidelines, the USRDA guidelines, anything that has 5 calories or less, you can actually say it has 0 calories.
Is that right?
Now, here's what's interesting. That's per serving. That's why sometimes you'll see, if it has 4.5 calories, they'll round it down. They'll say it has 0 calories. But if it has 2 servings in that, if there's 2 servings in that box, it'll say it has 10 calories.
Interesting.
So that's why it's important to just read labelings. Now, is 5 calories going to kill us? No, not necessarily. But Shane did talk about how important it can affect our glucose. And if you're a diabetic or if you're sensitive to glucose, which really we all really are, and if we get too much glucose, we'll all eventually be diabetics if our insulin does not respond appropriately. So
let me tell you why let me tell you why that 4 calories matters. For if you're a type 1 or a type 2, let's just say type 1, because type 2s in general, I am actually putting you in a big category. In general, you probably really don't care about adequate glucose control. That's why you're in the situation in the first place. So your blood sugars, and your doctor will tell you this, and the American Diabetic Association will tell you this too. They will tell you that it's okay to have blood sugars between 80 and 200. Well, that's a disastrous recipe for losing your legs, losing your eyesight, losing your kidneys. Okay. For those Dr. Bernstein patients who my son was and followed his protocols, remember, you're between 80 and 100 all the time. So let me give you an example of how strictly controlled he was, and we couldn't figure this out. And as a scientist, I finally put 2 and 2 together. We had dialed in his diet like crazy. We knew how much insulin he should take to be between 80 and 100, 105, 110 all the time. And he was. A1C of less than 5. Very, very healthy. Remember, 80 is not a low blood glucose number. I don't care what your doctors, your endocrinologist tells you. It's not low. That's what mine is probably right now. And type 1 diabetics can do it healthily. Okay.
Shawn Baker's was 62 yesterday morning.
He had a 53 this weekend as well.
Oh, did he?
14-hour fast.
Anyway, go ahead.
And so point of it is, in the morning, we had dialed in all of his food. We had dialed in his insulin. We had dialed in, all of his protocols to when he should take insulin, how much if he eats a little bit of carbohydrate. Remember, he's very, very low carbohydrate eater, because you're going to have a roller coaster ride. If you're insulin dependent, type 1 or type 2, you're going to have a roller coaster ride of blood glucose levels if you have any type of substantial carbohydrates. Anyway, I figured it out. What it was is he was taking gummy vitamins 1 a day.
There you go.
And it pushed his blood glucose level up about 10 to 15 points every day.
And remember, I talked about that early on, is that gummy bears have sorbitol in them. That's a sugar alcohol. So that's partly what was spiking his glucose right there.
Probably. Yep.
Yeah.
So I took those, even though 3 of my kids didn't have diabetes. I threw those things out the window in the trash can because we just don't need them in our house. And so anyway, so that, like you said, Shawn, a serving size, maybe less than 5 calories, 1 gram, maybe 2 grams of glucose or whatever, that can affect your blood glucose level. It absolutely can.
For sure.
Do you know how popular those are in the bariatric community too? Even like people who just had surgery that are still type 2, right? We're told that those are okay, and they're not. They're really not. We shouldn't be doing gummy vitamins.
No.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan. That's for sure. So Shane, do you have any more to comment about Sweet and Low?
Not on Sweet and Low. I think don't we show another package? Bottom line is, let's see if this is stevia in the raw. Okay. And this, if we zoom in on it, we'll zoom in, and you'll see, oh, look at that first ingredients, dextrose.
Yeah. Right. There it is.
It's glucose.
Right.
It's glucose. It raises blood glucose levels. So they call it dextrose. Okay. Dextrose is synonymous with glucose. Anytime you have any kind of a powder form of any kind of artificial sweetener, you're going to have some additive in it, whether it be maltodextrin, dextrose, erythritol, something like that. It's going to affect your blood glucose level. And then you'll see stevia leaf extract is the second ingredient in there.
Well, and we talked about it with enantiomeric chemistry, but dextrose is D-glucose, correct?
Yeah, but D-glucose is glucose.
That's what I'm saying.
Exactly. Yeah, because L-glucose is basically, they actually tried to, it's an interesting story. They tried to actually make L-glucose as an
artificial sweetener.
Yeah. And the problem is economically, it's very, very difficult to chemically synthesize. Very difficult.
Well, I think it's hard to take it from the racemic mixture, isn't it? Really hard.
You have to separate those those enantiomers, and that's very, very expensive.
Right.
So.
Okay. Anything else on stevia and the raw?
No. Now we'll move on to this label, the liquid label, if you have it. I think I showed that one too.
Now, remember Truvia. Let's talk about Truvia too. Truvia, you showed that. We didn't zoom in on it, but remember,
Truvia is just like a stevia and the raw. I think it's just a different marketing
right?
tool.
But remember, its first ingredient was erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol. Yeah. Which that's why you have to be careful with all stevia. All the stevias are not created equal. So be careful and relabels.
Yeah. So here is just if you look at it, serving size is 5 drops. Okay, so this is a liquid. You know, it's gonna come in a bottle like this. This is actually the only non-caloric sweetener that I actually use in general. I'll be honest, if I'm at a restaurant, I will take stevia in a packet. Sometimes I'll even take Splenda, but that's just very rare. You know, very, very rare. And then if I'm really, really, really clean, like if I'm getting ready to do a bodybuilding show, I won't use anything. No toxicity in my body at all. And I'll do that for 4 or 5 months with no sweeteners, including stevia. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yeah. So if you look at here, now this one is actually, and you can see this for you people that have purchased stevia before at the store in a liquid. You can buy lemon flavor, you can buy vanilla flavor, you can buy just non-flavored. This one has some water in it, obviously water safe, and then it's got organic stevia leaf extract, and then some natural flavors, and then some vanilla extract. So this is a vanilla flavor, but you'll notice there's no dextrose, there's no maltodextrin, there's no other anything like that. So it's just in general, the only sweetener here is organic stevia leaf extract. So that's
also because it doesn't have any preservatives in it. That's why it has to be refrigerated and it has a short date.
Yeah. Yeah. Did it have a date on there?
Well, I don't know. I'm guessing.
Yeah, it probably does.
Yeah. Now, if they did put enough vanilla extract in there with the alcohol and vanilla extract, it could be preserved with the alcohol, but they don't have enough.
I've noticed they sometimes put alcohol in it, probably as a preservative.
Yeah, I mean, they could also use it because it's a good solvent also to dissolve the stevia, but usually it's probably because of the preservative.
So let me talk about stevia for just a minute. There is actually some research papers out there, and I'm a scientist myself. I know how research works, and I believe a lot of it, and I'm also skeptical of a lot of research. And I don't care what the topic is. I want to read it myself and see how the studies were performed and so on and so forth. There's some data out there to say that stevia is not healthy for you. And so here's what a lot of people say. Well, it's organic or it's natural. Yeah. Here's what I want to tell you. So is heroin. So is LSD.
Cocaine.
So is caffeine. So is cocaine. So is nicotine. All those come from some kind of a plant. Okay. Whenever we actually concentrate anything, which is what we're doing with stevia, we concentrate anything that is not for its original intended use, it's probably not the best thing. It just probably isn't. So I assume that the reason that stevia leaf has a sweetener in it, or it's sweet, is I assume it's some kind of an insecticide that insects that are around that region don't eat, and they don't want it.
Well, in a high enough dose, and I can tell you this because we compound with stevia as a sweetener, in a high enough dose, if you taste stevia, it is bitter. And of course, if you look at most poisons that come from plants, i.e. cocaine, one of the reasons the plant makes that is so animals don't eat the cocoa leaves. And that could be the same thing with stevia. Now, here's one thing you have to look at too. If you ate the whole plant, would it be like that? Probably not. But that's why you have to read it's stevia extract. They concentrated it, just like you said. They concentrated what they think is the active ingredient in it. That's why eating the whole plant is not the same as eating one individual ingredient in the plant.
It's why chewing on tobacco leaf is not the same as smoking a cigarette.
That's correct. That's right. Or chewing on cocoa leaves, for that matter, is not the same as snorting cocaine.
It's not. It's right. Not. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but I think actually help. Actually, I know there are health benefits to chewing on tobacco and chewing on cocoa leaves. There absolutely
for sure.
Is there a health benefit to snorting cocaine or smoking? Probably not.
No. Right. Okay. So we talk about where are we going next, Shane?
So I think we talked about the labels. We talked about monosaccharide, talked about disaccharides, talked about polysaccharides, and really, I just kind of want as Tosha and I and you have all talked, is artificial sweeteners can be a good thing, and I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do for myself, and you have to make with your personal coach like Tosha. You have to make your decision on what's going to work for you. Here's what works for me. I use stevia in my tea every morning. Okay. Couple of drops. And that's what I do every morning. If I'm at a restaurant, which I probably eat out more than most people, maybe a couple times a week, I'll either have water or I will have iced tea that will have and then I'll have them bring me stevia if they have it. Okay. But sometimes I eat cleaner than that. And it's better just to have water, but if I'm going to make a choice, there's an interesting research paper that I just fell across as I kind of studied this, and I never really believed it, but it did look like it was double blind. It was done pretty well. Now, a lot of people say, "Oh, I'm just going to." Okay, I'm sometimes sarcastic, like my brother, so I love it. I was pouring, I don't know, NutraSweet or something into my drink once, and somebody says, "Oh, that'll kill your kidneys." This guy was about a 350-pound overweight guy that was eating donuts as he was telling me that. I'm not joking.
Right.
I'm not joking. And so here's what some people say. Oh, NutraSweet causes you to gain weight. No, it's usually because somebody's drinking Diet Coke and eating donuts. That's what's causing them to gain weight. Right. Okay. If I have a choice, what do I drink? Real Coca-Cola with sugar or a Diet Coke? I choose a Diet Coke. And I do not drink those in excess. I drink probably less than 2 a week.
Moderation is key.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but moderation is very hard, as Tosha knows, especially for people that have weight issues. And if you actually look at the word moderation, dietitians use those words all the time. There's no such thing as moderation for a person that has food addiction issues. There's not. They don't know moderation. It's not necessarily their fault. It's their brain chemistry. Yeah. So the best thing to do is don't have it at all. Hate to say
I agree.
it.
Tasha, you want to comment on that?
Oh yeah. I mean, okay. So I was that 300-pound person here. Let me go to 7-Eleven on my way outside of town, and I'm going to get, cookies and donuts and chips to fill up the downtime on my drive to Montana instead of listening to a podcast or something else on the radio, right? I made those poor choices, which is what got me over 300 pounds. Or here, let me order a Big Mac, but give me a water. It's like, here, I'm healthy with the water, but give me a Big Mac and supersize the fries, right? I did make choices like that. I did it. And now it's like, if you put me around like no-bake cookies, me and my mom used to make those, when I was a kid. I can't stop myself at one. I go in, I eat one, and then I'll eat another one, and then I'll sneak another one, and I'll eat like 4 in a day. You know how many calories are in a no-bake cookie?
I mean, I'm with you, Tasha. Right.
I do really good control.
Yep. I can do the same thing, Tasha. Right. I can do the same thing, Tasha. That's why I just don't have them in the house. I don't know if some of you guys saw my post. You'll have to stay tuned for my video that I'm going to be doing on health insurance. But for a video shoot, I bought some Cheetos and drank some Coke. And I will tell you, I had to eat some of the Cheetos for the video shoot. And I will tell you, I had a big bag of Cheetos. And I will tell you, after we were done and the video shoot was over and stuff, I had that bag of Cheetos and I'm going to have one. Oh, no. And I'm in the process of putting them in the garbage. And I probably ate 5 or 6 more. And so I threw it in the garbage and turned on the compactor to crush them all down. And I dumped the Coke down the sink because if not, I would have eaten them all and drank the Coke. I mean, and I think too, people that struggle with food addictions, it's kind of like, here's my opinion. It's kind of like if you're an alcoholic, you shouldn't go to a bar. If you're a recovering alcoholic, don't go to a bar. If you have food addictions, stay away from everything that tempts you. That means, don't watch the Food Channel. I mean, that is just going to be more tempting, in my opinion. So let's go
Pinterest.
into a few more.
Pinterest for food addicts. I go on there a lot, and I'm Pinteresting, getting recipes to modify and stuff. And then I'm like, oh, that looks good. We should make that. I wonder if we could modify this. Can we make it healthier?
Right.
No, it's not that healthy.
Right. Right. Let's talk about a few more artificial sweeteners. We have a few more to go and some more natural sweeteners. So this is the blue, and this is aspartame. It's actually 2 amino acids put together, aspartic acid, and what's the second one, Shane? You know?
Actually, I don't know, and I didn't actually know they were amino acids put together.
They're 2 amino acids put together.
So are they essential amino acids?
One of them is, and I can't remember.
Okay.
Anyway, this is the blue. This kind of came out when saccharin, after saccharin got some bad publicity about causing cancer. So then aspartame came out. But here's one of the things. If you read the label on aspartame, what's the first ingredient on this? You're going to love this, Shane and Tosha. First ingredient, dextrose with maltodextrin.
Oh, yeah. Great.
Oh, yeah. Sounds real healthy. So it's got a dextrose with maltodextrin, which is just multiple dextrose. And aspartame is the second ingredient. And the third one, and a lot of people don't realize this one, which is a really sweet substance, is asulfame potassium. And it's a really, really potent sweetener also. I didn't know until I just read this that Equal, which this is called, has asulfame potassium in it. So there again, you got to be careful with the labels. Could this affect your blood sugar? Absolutely. It's got dextrose in it. It's got glucose in it, period. So the next one we're going to go over is the newest artificial sweetener that I can remember is because these other ones started getting bad press, is Splenda, which is also the yellow. Sucralose, when it came out, it was known as kind of being the safest possibly. And I'm looking at can you zoom in on that? And I'll read the ingredient. First ingredient, let's take a guess. Dextrose. Second ingredient, maltodextrin. So there you go. Can it affect your blood sugar? Absolutely. So those are artificial sweeteners. And, because people are so into natural stuff, they gravitate towards natural, and it's all a marketing gimmick in a lot of ways. Like Shane said about stevia, it still comes from a plant. Aspartame, it's got 2 amino acids. You can't tell me that that's not natural. So that's natural, but we call it an artificial sweetener. That's why you have to really, think about what these mean and what's in them. So this actually is, and I didn't know I had this, but I have some of this. It's monk fruit sweetener. It's green like stevia, so you could get it mixed up easy. First ingredient, monk fruit's a natural plant, right? And monk fruit is kind of like stevia in the sense that it's not, it doesn't have sucrose in it. It is a sweetener in itself. But what does the monk fruit have in it? What's the first ingredient? Let's just take a guess. It is erythritol, so sugar alcohol. Second ingredient, fructose. And then this is interesting: chicory root flavor, stevia leaf extract, and then monk fruit extract. So read your labels. I mean, definitely read your labels. So check that out in there. And then here's another one that's a natural sweetener, and I've heard people talk about this. Oh, no, I'm going to get Shane's opinion on this. And Shane, I'm putting you on the hot seat because you weren't prepared for this. So, I don't use any kind of artificial sweeteners or any sucrose or high fructose corn syrup. I use agave syrup. Shane, what's your thought about agave syrup?
It's a natural sugar. I mean, agave means cactus. Means cactus in Spanish. And so all it is you're using cactus nectar, or just like you would use maple syrup from a maple tree. It's right.
And what do most, if you think of most plants, what kind of sugar do they usually excrete? It finally turns in
some kind of a fructose.
Agave is mostly fructose. Okay. And of course, you let it sit long enough, it'll become a saccharide, just like most
you let it sit too long, it'll become tequila.
That's true, right? Right, it will. It'll ferment. You gotta, yeast is ubiquitous, I guess, but throw some yeast in there and then it will ferment for sure. So, okay, last topic that we want to discuss is, and this we could talk on for hours, is that on these artificial sweeteners, first of all, we talked about moderation, and I'm big on that. Moderation in everything we do. But one of the things that they even talk about, even in moderation, is that these artificial sweeteners can affect your gut biome. Shane, will you discuss that a little bit?
Yeah, again, I'd have to see the research on it. I mean, especially some of them. I don't remember which ones. Some of them are chlorinated, and certainly if they're chlorinated, that you could probably have some kind of a hydrochloric acid reaction or something like that from some SN2 or some kind of reaction that probably could hurt your gut biome or hurt the good bacteria in your gut. I really don't know. And what I will say about gut biome as well is we don't know in general. When people tell me about what a good gut biome is and what a bad gut biome is, I don't think they really know. And I don't care if they're a Nobel Prize winning person in medicine or in chemistry or in science or whatever it is. I don't think we really know. There's too many things going on. My gut biome is different today than it was yesterday. It'll be different again tomorrow.
Dynamic.
It's very, very dynamic. And so when somebody gets their gut biome tested, by the time you get the test result, it's probably not even relative anymore,
well, I can tell you this, being in healthcare and treating people with gut biome issues, I will tell you, if you're having issues, then that's going to be different.
That's true. That's true. I don't have issues, but I have in the past, and I just switched some things up that I actually changed, and it made a big difference. And so, so yes, I absolutely think they can affect the gut biomes. Anything we ingest can affect our gut biomes. Alcohol definitely affects the gut biome. Big
alcohol is a toxin. Alcohol is a poison.
Yeah, and so is a sweetener. Artificial sweeteners or natural sweeteners are poisons.
That being said, so aspartame is actually metabolized to methanol.
Is it methanol
which is
or methanol?
Methanol. It's methanol.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, which is, wood alcohol. The alcohol we drink is ethanol. This is methanol, wood alcohol, known to be a poison. So now, that being said, it's in small amounts, and, but here again, and so if you're healthy already, you should be able to tolerate that and be able to metabolize that and excrete it. But if you get too much of it, obviously wood alcohol is poison for sure.
And that's the thing, is like, if it's toxic, why take it?
Yeah, but there again, every food we eat, whether it be meat or plant, there are certain toxins in there that if our body, think about the bad bacteria that are in meat, the bad bacteria, the bad funguses that are in meat, some kind of meat. Our body has to deal with those, and they're toxic if we don't have a good immune system. So that's why it's,
before we get some vegan that's saying that meat is bad, let's just also say that there's bacteria in vegetables as well.
Oh, for sure. Right. Everywhere. Bacteria, protozoal, and funguses are ubiquitous. They're everywhere. That's why we need to be able to deal with them. Viruses are everywhere.
More inflammatory chemicals are in vegetables besides meat. I just want to be very careful there.
Of course you did.
You're going to label this as a vegan podcast, dude, and you do not want
No, I think people are clear that this isn't a vegan podcast. So, all right, we're getting short on time here, so we're getting ready to wrap up. So, Tosha, what would you like to end this podcast with truth in labeling, or how would you like to educate and empower our listeners?
Okay, so I know this question's going to come up. So, if I choose a sweetener, what are my best two choices?
Two choices. First of all, I think Shane made it pretty clear that Stevia Drops is probably the best choice. It has the least, it's going to affect your glucose the least. And my personal opinion is the second choice would be if you don't have any underlying diabetes. If you do, then that Stevia Drops are nothing. But my second one would be Stevia packets. Truvia or Stevia in the raw, I think would be the best. Shane?
And where would monk fruit come in? Because that's pretty popular. I mean, that's pretty popular out there. So
Yeah,
like,
I think monk fruit is going to be right along the lines of stevia. Honestly, I just don't have a lot of experience with it, but monk
The one
fruit, I
time-
think could. Yeah.
The one time I tried monk fruit, it didn't taste good at all, so I threw it away. I mean,
Well, I can tell you, I got to tell you this anecdotal evidence. Our producer just made a cup of coffee today with monk fruit that I didn't know we had in the pharmacy. Where is it? And it tasted nasty.
that's
So,
what I thought too. But anyway, it's a personal choice. But I would stick with stevia drops if anything is stevia drops. And you know, a good thing about stevia drops is you can actually go through a lot really easy. So it's expensive. And I think that's good. It makes
right.
people have to think about using it.
Right. Yeah, for sure. Okay, Shane, what are your parting words for today's podcast?
I just think that, first of all, it's been a pleasure and an honor. Thanks again for letting me be on your show. And, definitely read labels, even read and think about the little things. Think about those little packets that you put in your coffee or your tea or what's in your Diet Coke. Think about those things and actually what it's doing to your body. That is, is it the most important thing? No, and Tosha would probably tell you this. No, if you're 300 pounds and you have type 2 diabetes, we're not going to be probably first talking about artificial sweeteners. You got to get some other things figured out first. But once you start getting things dialed in with your diet and your movement and your relationships and how you rest, and then you start getting into the details, think about what are the sweeteners that you're putting into your body for sure.
I love it. All right. Well, thank you two experts for being on today. You guys are a pleasure to have on. I love it. So you've been listening to Health Solutions with Shawn and Janet Needham. Tune in Thursday. We have Nikki. She is a physician's assistant in northern Idaho. And she's going to be talking about what she does with her direct primary care practice and how she takes care of first responders and military patients in particular. So you don't want to miss out on that one. Tune in Thursday, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. As always, thank you for listening and watching. Thank you, our guests today, Tosha and Shane. We love having you guys on. Thank you for listening.